Today I'm going to give to you not one, but two incredibly powerful tools to have in your drinks making arsenal. First, we're going to head back in time, revisiting the lockdown sensation that was the Dalgona Coffee. We'll talk about how we can utilize techniques from this, not only to build a drink in itself, but also as a really powerful way to introduce coffee and that amazing creamy texture to a whole range of drinks. Second, I'm going to introduce you to a massively underrated coffee cocktail called a Dominicana, which is going to be perfect for fans of a White Russian, an Irish coffee, or a Brandy Alexander. And then stay tuned till the end of the video, where we're going to combine the two, introducing some delicious seasonal flavors, and I'll share with you the most luscious drink, which I call the Dalgona Dominicana. We've got a lot to cover in this video, so let's get started. A Dalgona coffee is essentially a sweetened, whipped instant coffee, usually layered on something like milk or oat milk, and it's a very simple thing to prepare. The original specs call for essentially 1 teaspoon of coffee, 1 teaspoon of sugar, and a teaspoon of water. This is wildly inconsistent, so I like to go with 2 grams of instant coffee, and obviously the better the instant you use, the better the end results will be, so choose one that you enjoy. Then I go 10 grams of sugar. And I do find a nice fine sugar, something like a caster sugar, or this is a golden caster sugar, works best. And then to this, we're going to add 20 grams of ideally boiling water. Once the water's in, I actually like to just leave this alone for a second, just so the sugar and the coffee can start dissolving into the water. If you start whipping too soon, you can end up with the kind of coffee and the sugar up the sides of the glass, which you don't really want. So just leave it to stand still for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. Once everything's looking like it's dissolving into the liquid, you can go ahead and start whisking. And I like to use one of these, which I'll link exactly what this is in the description below. But if you want to go manual, like a lot of people did in lockdown, you can use a bowl and a whisk. That can be an incredibly long process. I must admit, I actually never made a Dalgona coffee back in the lockdown days. I think because I didn't have one of these. And despite having more time than I've ever had in my life, I did not have time to stand there whisking instant coffee for minutes. At least minutes. 3-4 minutes, when I could be making other drinks much more easily with much less effort. That being said, if you've got a milk frother like this, it speeds up the process massively. You get this really nice foam, which is super moussey and light, and actually quite stable. That looks to be about done. And then traditionally, that just gets layered on top of your favorite milk or oat milk. My favorite being the OATLY Barista edition, which is a really nice base for the drink. Layer on your Dalgona, which will just float on top really nicely. And that is a pretty great drink. It's definitely interesting. I think it's obviously only as good as the coffee that you choose, like I said, and a lot of instant coffee is not great. But since we're adding the sugar in there, it's got that amazing texture, the nice OATLY Barista edition underneath. It's actually a bit of a guilty pleasure. I've actually quite enjoyed these throughout the development of this video. But this is a really powerful tool which we can use to add coffee to lots of other drinks. But before we do that quickly, giving it a little taste. It is what it is. Sweetened instant coffee on top of the oat milk. I think it's pretty good. As a drink, definitely worth giving a try, particularly if you didn't back in the day in lockdown, which is like 5 years ago now. Something worth trying. However, I think there's so much more to this. And this is a really interesting way to add coffee to lots of other drinks, which we're going to explore later. But before we get there, I'm going to introduce to you what I think is a massively underrated coffee cocktail, which we're going to build upon later, which is called the Dominicana. Created by the late, great Sasha Petresky at Milk and Honey, the Dominicana, again, very simple, very easy to put together. Traditionally, it's a 3-ingredient cocktail, but if you're using a drier coffee liqueur, I like to add a little bit of sweetness in the form of sugar syrup. And this shares so much in common with the White Russian, an Irish coffee, and a Brandy Alexander, particularly the White Russian and the Brandy Alexander, where we've got that spirit base, a liqueur, and then something creamy on top. The spirit here is going to be an aged rum. Traditionally, of course, this had come from the Dominican Republic. I don't have any Dominican rum, unfortunately, so I'm going with 45 ml of Plantaray Original Dark Rum. This is a blend of rums from Jamaica and Barbados, giving a really nice character to the drink. The liqueur is going to be coffee liqueur, and I'm going with Algebra coffee liqueur here, 45 ml again. And because this is quite dry, I like to add just a little bit of sweetness here, just to kind of balance things out. So just 10 ml of a 2-to-1 sugar syrup. I'm going with Mon and Cane sugar. Before we add ice to this and start the clock ticking for when we need to serve the drink, I'm just going to prepare my creamy element. And when it comes to drinks like this, I always go with something like the OATLY Whippable Creamy Oat. I want this drink to be enjoyed by as many people as possible. And by using a plant-based alternative to cream, you get the same amazing texture, neutral flavour, but it's just so much more accessible for a lot more people. Again, I'm whisking this the lazy way. And you just want to bring it to a slightly stiffened texture. Still pourable, still nice and light and airy. So just a few seconds here. And if you want to whisk this with a regular whisk, that's completely fine. Just takes a little bit longer. So I use OATLY Creamy Oat all the time. Anywhere you see cream in a recipe, you can substitute this out for the OATLY Creamy Oat products, either the Creamy Oat single or the Whippable Creamy Oat for your double alternative. This works perfectly in so many drinks, particularly in Irish coffee, which this drink has a lot in common with. It just layers perfectly on top, and that's what we're going to do with this drink as well. As you can probably tell, I use this product all the time. I really stand by it. So massive thank you to OATLY for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check out their website in the description below, and now we can put together the rest of our Dominicana. We're just going to stir this down to chill, mix and dilute the drink. Strain that into an extremely cold glass, like this one, which looks amazing. And then just to finish the drink, we're just going to layer on that silky smooth cream, which should float perfectly. If it doesn't, it'll be a bit embarrassing. It looks pretty damn good to me. And then just garnish that with a little bit of nutmeg for that nice spicy aroma. So that, my friends, is the Dominicana, and I think that is a massively underrated drink. Flavour-wise, it's just like a chilled Irish coffee, pretty booze forward, which you'd expect. You can experiment with different rums in here to give you different flavour profiles, different coffee liqueurs to give you different kind of coffee flavour notes and levels of sweetness. The texture is just incredible. By whipping up the cream slightly, it's got that really smooth, silky surface, and there's just so much going on. For a very simple drink on the surface, it's a really powerful and just delicious flavour profile. The nutmeg adds a lot. And I just think, as I said before, if you love a White Russian with a bit more character, an Irish coffee served cold, or any kind of creamy cocktails like something like a Brandy Alexander, which is brandy, chocolate liqueur and cream, I think you're gonna love this. Really fantastic drink, massively underrated, because not a lot of people talk about this, but I think they should. So this is a really great basis, really interesting, but it did make me think, can I combine the two things we've talked about so far, the Dalgona Coffee, the Dominicana, bring the two together, almost like an inverted Dominicana, where the coffee, rather than being underneath, sits on top of the drink, with that really light, creamy texture, maybe bringing it all together slightly, and it worked out really well. So that's what I'm gonna show you now, the Dalgona Dominicana. So to build our Dalgona inverted Dominicana, this is gonna be a really simple build. The first thing we're gonna put together is gonna be the cocktail base, because then we can leave this before we put the Dalgona together. Same recipe more or less, 45 mils of an aged rum for the base flavour profile. This time for sweetness, I'm gonna add 10 mils of our recent pumpkin spice syrup, which is gonna be very seasonal for this time of year. But you can use any syrup here, add different flavours to this, different characteristics depending on the season and your preferences. And then 45 mils of OATLY Whippable Creamy Oat for that amazing silky creamy texture and neutral flavour profile. And before we shake this up, we just want to leave this to one side and build that Dalgona base once again. So I'm building this in the same way. 2 grams of our instant coffee, 10 grams of golden caster sugar, or a regular caster sugar will be fine, 20 grams of our boiling water, which again we're going to leave just to kind of mingle and dissolve. And something I should have mentioned here, don't worry about using hot water. By the time you've whisked it all up and the coffee and the sugar have taken some temperature out of it, it cools right down. You don't need to worry about this being warm and the bottom being cold. It comes to a nice kind of similar temperature anyway, so don't panic about using hot water. It really helps with the dissolving though, so it is nice to use that. I'm gonna leave this just for a second while I put my scales away. And then we can just whiz this up like we did before. It takes a while. Now we can shake up our cocktail with lots of ice. Gonna fine strain that into a very cold glass with the big ice block in there, leaving a bit of room at the top for our Dalgona to live on. And then we can add our nice glossy Dalgona coffee to the top, which Looks pretty damn cool. And then finish that one more time with a little dusting of nutmeg, or your favorite spice of choice. So there we go, the inverted Dalgona Dominicana. Giving this one a try. I just am so excited about this. Cheers. It's like melted rum and raisin ice cream, a little bit of spice on the nose, the silkiest, creamiest texture from the Dalgona, the OATLY Whippable Creamy Oat in the base. The flavors are incredible. I actually didn't use specialty instant coffee, I just used supermarket instant coffee. Kind of reasonable standard, but nothing crazy expensive or complicated. And it just balances out really nicely. Texturally, my word, it's fantastic. That, I think, is fantastic. But you don't have to be limited to putting the Dalgona just on top of a Dominicana. You could put this on lots of other drinks. As I said before, a brandy Alexander with the brandy, chocolate and cream. You could flip and reverse it, add a little bit of coffee flavor. That'd be delightful, like a brandy mocha. It's just like melted ice cream, and I think it's a really exciting base. So experiment with this, have some fun. I've actually really enjoyed this process, even though it feels like I'm 5 years late to the party. Dalgona is a thing. Dominicana, very much a thing that you should definitely try. And I think this brings them both together really, really nicely. So once again, a massive thank you to OATLY for sponsoring the video. As always, a huge thank you to you guys for being there. I can't believe how many of you there are. It blows my mind, so I'm very, very grateful. I appreciate you watching. If you've enjoyed it, you might want to consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll put more videos for you to watch on screen here, which I really hope you enjoy. So thank you once again. See you in the next video, and cheers.